Welcome to the Sports Passion Podcast.
Oh, blocked by James! LeBron James with the rejection.
And here's your host, Lars Marendorf.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Passion Podcast. This is going to be the next all-English episode as I will talk with Mike Vogel from the Washington Capitals NHL coverage about the latest trade that happened. Actually, the only trade I missed on Monday in my big German update about the trade deadline that happened about 45 minutes after the trade deadline was closed. So it officially became known that the Washington Capitals traded away two of their players to the Detroit Red Wings. It was actually a trade of Richard Panik and Jakob Vrana for Anthony Mantha. First round pick, second round pick involved there as well. Mike will go into details about what the reasons were, about what this could mean for the Capitals. So right now, just my short take on this one. I was surprised that the Capitals did such a big move. I thought that they would just, maybe add a goalie for backup reasons there, but they made a big trade. They reshuffled a little bit their forward deck. They brought in Michael Ruffle as well from the Flyers, and I think that's at least interesting. I don't know if it makes them better, but it is interesting. They get a little tougher there, a little bit bigger, and maybe that's the kind of style they expect to see in the playoffs. I don't know if they will see that against other teams there as well, because I think that teams they might meet in the semifinals. It's not the conference finals this year. Those teams will play a different style, but so far they have to take care of their own division, and they think that with Mantha there on the second line, probably they will have a better chance to come out of the East Division, and maybe they will. Enjoy the interview with Mike, and talk to you next week, and bye bye. Line was finished, and that was probably the biggest trade of the day. So I had to reach out to someone to cover that trade. And who's better to talk to than a guy who covers the Washington Capitals on a daily basis? So I'm happy to have on the line Mike Vogel from Washington. Mike, thanks for coming onto the show.
My pleasure, Lars. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Mike. So before we go into the trade, one thing I did during the last month was when I talked to someone from North America, I tried to get a picture of how they are covering the teams right now. Obviously, strange times, different times. I've had people from, I think, Murat Artis. He told me that he was not even at the games from the Winnipeg Jets in Canada, so the situation is a little different in Canada. What is your daily routine look like, and what is the arena, the Capital One Arena, look like right now? Are there fans coming in right now? I think there are not so far. So what does it look like now covering a Washington Capitals game?
Yeah, no fans yet, Lars. Caps play the Flyers tonight at home, and then there'll be no fans tonight, no fans on Thursday when they play Buffalo. But when they come back from a 4-game road trip in between then, they will be able to have fans here starting on April 27th. And at that point, they'll still have 8 games left in the season, 6 of them at home. So they'll be permitted to have 10% capacity. So somewhere in the neighborhood of probably just under 2,000 people for those final 6 regular season games is how it's set up right now.
Okay. And
as far as my day-to-day, I get tested every morning, whether we are off or not. The players, everybody, in our group gets the group that travels with the team. We all get tested first thing in the morning. So if it's a day where there's no practice or anything, you still have to get out of bed and come in the morning and be tested, and then the rest of the day is yours after that. It only takes about 5 minutes, but that's been going on since the very early days of January, every single day for all of us. And I'm luckily been able to go to every game, home and road, and be in the buildings. And it was very difficult early on in the season to see those buildings empty, and to, those 10 minutes before the game when usually you hear that buzz in the crowd and you feel the anticipation of the match coming up, and you got this nervous excitement for the game coming up, and it just wasn't there, and it was a little bit soul crushing, to be honest with you. Early on, especially at a place like Madison Square Garden in New York. But it has been good. I think that the first game we saw with fans, if I remember right, was in Philadelphia about a month ago, a little more than a month ago, and we've had a few games since. It's still not the same, and with only a few thousand, and they're still piping in artificial crowd noise, which I really hate to hear. Even in empty buildings. So yeah, it's been very difficult, and I think everyone is pretty eager for things to get back to some hopeful sense of normalcy.
Yeah, and you can feel the difference on TV now when there are a couple of games, like you mentioned, where there are partial crowds in the arenas. You can feel the difference between those artificial noises and an actual crowd reacting to a game, because it's always the flow of the game. The crowd feels it way better than they could do that on an artificial base there. You mentioned there's a game. You mentioned there's a game tonight for the Capitals against the Flyers. So there will be new players probably in the lineup for the Washington Capitals. So let's start with the biggest trade they did, and they kind of surprised me there. They sent out Richard Panik and Jacob Vrana and a 2021 first-round pick and a second-round pick next year to the Detroit Red Wings for Anthony Mantha. I was surprised because I thought that if the Capitals would do a trade, it would be regarding forwards or defense. It would be just a minor trade. The only thing I saw for them, and the only thing I really heard about them, was maybe they get someone for their goalie depth there to kind of fill the role that was meant to be Henrik Lundqvist. But I was surprised by that big trade. What are your thoughts on this one? Why did the Caps made such a big move with a couple players involved, with a first-round draft pick, obviously a big price for just one player, if you want to say it that way? Why did the Caps made that trade?
Yeah, there's a lot to it, Lars. I think, looking at I think they like Jacob Vrana. They like the way he was playing and the way he was developing. I know he had struggled some this year. He only had one goal in his last 15 games, and he had been scratched a couple of times. They were trying to get him going. There were some issues, I guess, with Peter Laviolette thinking that he could play a little harder on the puck and be a little more forceful in his game. But as I said, I think they really liked the player and everything. But one of the concerns they had was that as a restricted free agent with arbitration rights, and a guy who, Jacob had 24 goals 2 seasons ago and 25 last year, and was on pace for, if it was an 82-game season this year, he would probably have 20, somewhere between 20 and 30 once again. And, typically when a player like that goes to arbitration, you kind of lose control over what his contract could be. It's being decided by a third party who may not have the team's best interests at hand. And, I think they could see that there was a chance that Jacob his salary would go up somewhere in the neighborhood of what Anthony Mantha's is, somewhere in between $5.5 $6 million a year. And so I think they were worried about that, knowing that they've got to sign Alex Ovechkin and they've got to sign Ilya Samsonov this offseason. So in getting Mantha, that gives them some cost certainty. They know that he's signed for 3 more years. They know what his number is, and he's only a year older than Jacob Vrana. He plays I think both guys are capable of scoring 30 goals in the National Hockey League, but I just think they're both very different players. Jacob is more of a rush player, more of a speed player, a breakaway player. Anthony Mantha is more of a below the dots kind of guy, a guy who's plays more of a power game, but still can shoot the puck and still skates very well for a big man. And I think the cost of and the other part of the equation for the Caps too, in trying to clear some cap space to sign Ovechkin and to sign Samsonov, was to get Richard Panik's contract off the books. And Richard had signed a 4-year deal, and this was the second year of that deal, so he's got 2 years left at a total of $5.5 million. And he had played okay in Washington, but his play wasn't up to the contract, and recently he had not been playing and was actually on the taxi squad. So I think they saw a way of taking a guy who they weren't using and who was kind of a problem in terms of the contract, and they found a way to convert him and a good asset like Jacob Vrana into a player that they saw as fitting a little bit better into their system. And I think the cost of doing that was the draft pick. We've seen some of these trades happen recently where teams are using draft picks to get salary off their books. It's similar to what Toronto did with Patrick Marleau a year or two ago, where they traded a first-round pick to Carolina to get him off of their payroll. So, with the flat cap around the league, because of the pandemic and such, the salary cap has stayed flat at $81.5 million for a couple of years now, and it makes it difficult for teams to be able to re-sign their players and such. So I do think that they view Mantha as a guy whose game is maybe a little more conducive to the type of hockey they're going to be playing in the playoffs this year against, whether it's Pittsburgh or the New York Islanders or the Boston Bruins. I think they view Mantha as a guy who would be more effective playing against those teams than perhaps Jacob would be. And, with Alex Ovechkin, Zdeno Chara, Nicholas Backstrom, some really good future Hall of Fame players who are in their 30s, or in Zdeno's case, in his 40s, they don't have a lot of time to waste, and I think they made it clear that they're looking to try to win another Stanley Cup this year.
Yeah, for sure. And he probably will fit into the second line smoothly there, right next to Backstrom and Oshie, I guess.
Yep, tonight that's how it's going to go. They're going to have the first line would be Ovechkin with Kuznetsov and Tom Wilson, and then the second line is, as you said, Mantha with Backstrom and Oshie. And I mean, when you look at it, Lars, you got 3 very big bodies in the top 6 there in Wilson, Mantha, and Ovechkin. And I guess if you wanted to, you could scatter those guys across 3 lines too. You could have one of them on each of the top 3 lines and present some big problems for the opposing team's defense. So I think it gives Peter Laviolette some options too, as far as how he wants to deploy those guys. But it also looks like Mantha's going to be getting some power play time here as well. So yeah, I think it's created some excitement. Certainly, there's a lot of Caps fans too who are upset with the trade. I think Jacob Vrana was a well-liked and well-loved player here in Washington, but this time of year when there's 14 games left and the playoffs are almost upon us, there's a lot of excitement, and I think people are kind of excited to see how this plays out starting tonight with Mantha's first game as a Capital.
And you mentioned Richard Panik is also out of Washington. They did another trade. They brought in Michael Raffle from the Flyers. They are playing them tonight. So was that also something where they can say, okay, it's not a one-on-one replacement, obviously, but it's still another body that they can throw in there to do some combinations in the third or fourth line? I've seen Raffle play actually the last time I was in North America with the Flyers there, and one thing Elaine Vigneault mentioned there, that he is also a veteran. You can put him into a lot of situations there. He can give you a lot of things. Is that something they had in mind for Michael Raffle there as well?
Yeah, I think so, Lars. I think the reason they like Raffle is again to like you said, replace Richard Panik as far as a depth forward, a guy who can play in the bottom six. But also the reason they like him is that he's also, unlike Richard Panik, Panik can play both wings. Raffle can also play both wings, but Raffle is also capable of playing center. And I think they were looking for a little bit of insurance at the center position. Earlier this season, they were without Lars Eller for a little bit, and they were without Evgeny Kuznetsov for a little bit. And there was a time when they were without both of those players for a little bit, and it kind of exposed, a lack of depth at that position. So I think that was one thing that they were looking to shore up. I think most people expected them to add some type of bottom six depth center, and I don't think too many people will have Michael Raffle on their, saw him as a candidate for that. But I agree with you. I've seen him play a lot over the years. He's played over 500 games in the league, all of them with Philadelphia, and for me, he's a very hard player to play against. He's very diligent, very detailed. He's got a little bit of scoring touch.
Yeah.
He scored 21 goals in his second year in the league, but for me, mostly he's a good penalty killer, very good two-way player, a guy that you can put out on the ice, and he's not going to hurt you. Just a very solid, workmanlike player who I think it should fit here well as far as being able to play at any of those bottom six positions if the need should arise. He's not going to play tonight because, as I understand it, he's got a little bit of an upper body injury that he's recovering from. And again, right now with Mantha just replacing Vrana, there's not a real need for Michael in the lineup yet, but they're definitely happy to have him here in case the need does arise later in the season or during the playoffs.
Okay, looking towards the playoffs, you mentioned a couple teams there. It's a tight race at the top of the East Division. Capitals are tied with the Islanders for the lead right now. Pittsburgh just 2 points back. Boston is a couple more points back, but they have some games in hands there. Do you see the Capitals maybe, I don't know, it's always kind of dicey to see that from teams, but do you see them preferring one of those teams? I know that they played Boston pretty good the last couple of years. They beat them last weekend 8-1, so they still probably have their number this year, but Boston also made a big trade there. Do you see them having a preference there? Avoid the Islanders in the first round, something like that, or is it just...
I don't... I think they'll take whatever they get. Look at I think they've played Boston 6 times so far, and I think they've split those 6 games. I think they've played Pittsburgh 6 times, and I think they've split those 6 games too. Maybe they've only won 2 against Pittsburgh. I can't recall now. It's been a while since they played the Pens. And they played New York 5 times, and they've won 3 of the 5, although they've lost the last 2. So, I think they're confident that when they're playing their game and they're playing to the, the best of their capabilities, that they can beat anybody. So I think they'll, and like you said, it's so tight that it changes from night to night who's in what spot. And so I think they realize that more than likely they're going to have to be, if they want to get out of their division, they're going to have to beat 2 of those 3 teams. And I don't think they have any real preference. I think it's like you say, it's hard to pick your poison. You take what you get and do the best you can with it. And I think that's what they're looking at. Some years you can look at the playoff possibilities and it's pretty clear that this team's probably not as good as this team. Maybe we would rather have them in the first round. But the way, like you said, the division is this year, it's so tight between those four teams. And I don't think there's a lot of difference between any of them. I think you just take what you get and you try to win those four games. And if you do, you move on to the next one and try to win those four.
Okay. Mike, final question. I had a little rant on my last show because I saw the cap roll and from the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I know that they are working within the rules, but have you heard anything from the Caps or maybe from other teams that it is kind of, for me, it's pretty obvious that they are holding out their best player until the playoffs, and what I don't like is you can do that without having a cap hit. I know that there's long-term injury reserve and all that stuff, but I think that if you want to play or use a player in the playoffs, some of his salary has to count towards the salary cap. I don't want the full percent, make it 10, make it 20, whatever. But have you heard something about that from the Capitals or from any other teams?
No, I haven't, but I know what you're saying. There's been, we've seen that a couple of times over the years where, I'm thinking most recently, I think it was 2015 when Chicago, if I remember right, Patrick Kane was injured with a couple of months to go, and he was put on injured reserve, and they had a bunch of cap space that they gained from that, and they went out and made a trade for Antoine Vermette.
Yeah.
And, and Vermette was one of the most sought after and coveted players at that deadline. And they were able to bring him in and get through the rest of the season with him. And then, as soon as the playoffs started, boom, Patrick Kane is back in your lineup and you have Antoine Vermette. So, yeah, it's one of those things where sometimes we've seen that, if you've got a really good team that is able to stay at the top of the league or at the top of its division while missing one of its key players for, a period of a couple of months, it can actually be a benefit to you because you can make yourself a much deeper team by using that cap space, and then the salary cap magically goes away as soon as the regular season is over. And, I'm not sure, like you say, I'm not sure that it's necessarily a fair thing, but it is the way the rules are. And I think the only way it's going to change is if, some general managers from various teams decide that they don't like that rule anymore, and they bring it up at the rules committee meetings over the off season. And that could happen at some point. I think that's very possible that could happen. A lot of times these little loopholes and things that allow teams to circumvent the rules get closed up after a period of time when, guys are just general managers are, have seen it happen one or two or three times and said, okay, that's enough. Let's fix this and make sure it doesn't happen again. So, yeah, I would not be against something like that for sure.
Okay. It is Mike Vogel at VogelsCaps on Twitter, WashingtonCaps.com, dumpandchase.com. You mentioned to me you're very busy this week. Is there anything we can give a shout out to? Anything people can look forward to that you're going to do this week? Something special on your website, or I don't know if you are on another podcast as well.
Well, we've got 4 games, 6 nights, and it's just the usual busyness. But we do have Nicholas Backstrom playing in his 1,000th career game on Thursday against Buffalo. So we'll have some special stuff going up on the site about that. Nicholas is obviously a future Hall of Famer and a terrific player here. And it's been great to watch him for these last 15 years since the Caps drafted him. And there's been a lot of guys who've played 1,000 games in the league, but not too many who have done it with the same team. So it's a pretty great achievement. Yeah. And he follows in Alex Ovechkin's footsteps. They're the only 2 guys who have ever done it here in Washington.
Okay, Mike, thanks a lot for talking about the Capitals. I'm looking forward to your work. Maybe we can talk later in the playoffs, whenever. Thanks a lot. As always, in those times, stay healthy, and hopefully there'll be normal times coming soon for everyone. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Yes. Thanks, Lars. Thanks for having me. Always good talking to you. Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Thanks for listening. Bye, guys.